Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
All right, let's go into the screen share. And we, of course, are in Parshat Bahar, second to last Parsha of the book of Leviticus. We are moving so quickly, it is scary. Let's see why this. I see why. Okay, let's go where we need to go. And here's where we are. So we were talking about the sale of land, starting with the Shemitah. And the underlying principle, which the Torah will state actually explicitly, is that we don't own anything. And that's, I think, extremely significant if you think about, meditate carefully. What is it to own something? And what rights and responsibilities does ownership involve? And the understanding is that the very basis of ownership has to do with perpetuity. In other words, if you really own something, then you have it forever. It's under your control forever. Well, that's going to be an impossibility for human beings because the very nature of our existence is temporary. And since the nature of our existence is temporary, we only have the use of something essentially for a certain period of time. And likewise, when it comes to owning anything, except for one thing, which is our reputation. The reputation we create in this world, what we make out of ourselves in terms of our reputation, is something that is always there, even past our sojourn here, if we have that. So that's one reason, by the way, why bad mouthing and slander is so destructive, is seen as something so destructive, because essentially we are destroying someone's reputation. And trying to understand life in this very realistic kind of way without pretending, making pretense. And of course, if we don't own anything, it means we have a different kind of responsibility towards it. And of course, ultimately, we believe that the creator of the universe owns everything. And as such, we owe it to the owner of these things to act in a responsible kind of way regarding these things. And here, when it comes to land, we are being told how to do it. So part of it is the idea that this isn't a guessing game, that part of the greatness of Torah is that it sets out the rules that the owner, the ultimate owner of all of this, wants us to follow, so that we know that we are using it in the best possible way. And on some levels, it's clear, and on some levels, it's an involve of Torah studying it and getting a better understanding and perfecting that way, that relationship we have to the things in this world. And there's something very beautiful about all of that process. So let's go to this. I want to make sure we are in the right place here. Yes. V'natna haaretz pirya, the land will give its fruit. V'achaltem lasova, and you shall eat to a point of satisfaction. So we understand you can eat a lot, and you still may not be satisfied. But the idea of being able to eat and be satisfied is like the perfect place to be in that regards. Vishavtam lavetach, and you shall dwell in security upon it. So look at, you can see what gets packed into this brief verse as to having a life that is wonderful and satisfying. There's the Rashi here. V'natna haaretz v'gomer, the land will give, etc. V'yeshavtem lavetach alea, you shall dwell upon it in security. Shelo tidagu, that you should not worry. mishnat bitzoret, from a year of drought. You should not have to worry about such things. Va'achaltem lasova, and you shall eat and be satisfied. Af betoch mahame'ayim tehei bo bracha. It's saying that even within your innards, your body itself and your digestive system, you will have a blessing. And remember that the word blessing essentially always means satisfaction, never having to experience a lack. That's the idea, that you have plenty of whatever it is. Now we get into a more complicated thing, but it's as if the Torah is trying to look into human psychology here. Vechi tomru, and should you, of course, think, right? Should you think, ma nochal, because remember, they're being told that in the seventh year, they're not to plow, they're not to harvest, they basically have to allow the land to rest, to experience a Shabbat every 7 years. Should you think, ma nochal b'shana hashvi'it, what are we going to eat in the seventh year? Hein lo nizra, indeed, we're not planting, velo ne'esof, and we're not gathering etfu atenu, our harvest. We're not doing that. And here we go on this. Velo ne'esof el habayit, here referring to we're not gathering it into our homes. Etfu atenu, our harvest. So, for example, kagon yayin, such as wine, uferot ha'ilan, and the fruit of the trees, usfichin habaim me'alehem, and the safiach is spontaneous growth, aftergrowth, habaim me'alehem, which come from them. So we know that when trees are and harvests and things like that, that they are very generous in that. But we're not promoting that growth, etc. What are we going to eat? So let's go on. Vitziviti, I shall command. God is saying, I shall command et birchati lachem, my blessing for you, or for them. That would be lahem. So lachem would be to you. I will command my blessing upon you, bashana hashishit, in the 6th year, va'asa et hatfu'ah, so that it shall give its harvest, its produce, lishlosh hashanim, for those 3 years. So this is where it gets a little complicated for me as to how you calculate the 3 years. What 3 years are we talking about? So I'll do one more verse and then we'll go back and take a look at the commentary. Uzratem et hashana hashminit, and you shall sow in the 8th year, v'achaltem minatvu yashan, and you shall consume from the old produce. In other words, the stuff that was planted in the 6th year is going to last through the 7th and the 8th year. Ad hashana hachi'it, until the 9th year, ad bo tfu'ata, until its produce comes due to chlu yashan, you will be able to eat the old produce, that 6th year produce. Now, that's the 6th year produce is the stuff that they're going to put into their granaries and into their storehouses, etc., etc. In the 7th year, basically, because the land becomes ownerless, they are welcome to help themselves to whatever naturally is produced by the land, but they cannot harvest it as such. They can only enjoy it. So, and as I said, since it's ownerless, anyone essentially can now come and help themselves to whatever produce the land is producing, whether it's grapes or grain or fruit from trees or anything. So again, to emphasize and to reinforce the idea that we don't own anything. We are just, in a sense, renters. So here we go. This is Rashi explaining the 3 years. So I tried here to write down on the basis of the Rashi what I understand Rashi to be saying. So this is let me read the Rashi, and I'll do it on both these verses, l'shalosh hashanim, for the 3 years. So he says, l'miktzat hashishit. So he says part of the 6th year. So one of those years is year number 6, mi Nisan v'ad Rosh Hashanah, from Nisan until Rosh Hashanah. So that is essentially the summertime until the fall. And Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the next year, of the 2nd year. So even though it's part of a year, it still counts as a year. All right. And this, of course, this is the period of time when so much of this is growing. So the barley harvest is in Nisan, and that's one of the first bit of produce to come to fruit at that point, right, to maturity. And of course, the fruit trees and grapes and things like that get harvested in the fall. But we're talking here about that first growing season. And this, of course, they can take into their homes.
Isn't the barley harvest at Shavuot?
No, that's the wheat harvest. I'm glad you mentioned that, Judith. That's the whole point, is that barley is essentially cattle fodder, or understood as that, whereas wheat is considered human food because it has a fat to it, the cream of the wheat, that barley does not have. So
And what's harvested in Sukkot?
The fruit trees, grapes, fruit of the trees, apples, pears, oranges, etc. So
I thought the counting of the Omer had to do with barley.
It does. And that's why you start counting the Omer in Nisan, because it's the first. Go ahead.
But that's planting. Is it a winter crop that harvested at Passover?
Well, you actually start, I believe it's a very fast growing grass. So the truth is that you could start, remember the new year of the trees is Shvat, and then you have Adar and Nisan. And I would have to guess, and this is a guess on my part, that the barley is sown early after Shvat, because winter is coming to an end and you can put in the barley, or they put the barley, well, I mean, I doubt if the barley matures in 2 weeks, but I suspect that the barley, you put in the barley sometime in Adar, and it certainly could mature in about 6 weeks. At least it's possible.
Well, it doesn't really make sense.
I just know that the barley harvest is in Nisan. And maybe they do put it in at the beginning of winter time. Remember, it's a Mediterranean climate, so not to say that you don't have frost in Jerusalem, but there's a lot of Israel where, in the Shvela and places like that, where it's simply wet, but it's not frosty. It gets cold, but it's not, you don't have killing frosts. Do you want to follow up with a question or a point? You can do more research if you want and check it out. See how that works. But I know that what I have read is that the reason for the counting of the barley has to do with the Omer is because barley is harvested early. And the idea is that we move from the freedom of Pesach, which is represented by the maturing of the barley, until Shavuot, where we really become human beings in accepting the 10 Commandments.
It takes about 3 months from seed to harvest for barley.
Okay, so they would have to start in Shvat. It could be a winter crop. So it could be that they plant it early.
It does. I looked it up and it says it is harvested at Passover, but why did I always think that Omer and barley had something to do with each other and ended in Shavuot?
They do, because remember, you're counting towards the wheat harvest, and the wheat harvest is 7 weeks later.
I guess what I'm saying is, why didn't I know we were planting toward the wheat harvest and got confused with barley, which, wheat, every kid in America knows about. Barley, maybe only Jewish kids in America know about. I don't know.
Well, or else
And
they have soup. It makes the
yeah,
best soup as far as I'm
yeah.
concerned.
But
And Schultz, yes.
but you know, and what are they harvesting in the book of Ruth?
That would be the wheat harvest. They'd be
You
harvesting
know,
the wheat.
I'm just, it's like, this is
I believe. I believe.
this is
Yes.
so minor a thing, but the fact that I just heard this
Mhm.
is pretty astounding to me. And I've
Yeah.
always thought that it was about barley, and you know, these are the kinds of, this is, you know, this isn't a Talmud confusion, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a straight fact confusion that
Right.
never
It happens. It
was
happens.
there.
Listen, there are times when I'm astounded too by stuff that I feel I should have known. It happens. But I'm
Yeah.
glad you're part of this class. Look at that.
Yep.
So it's a delight that you have lived your life in a way that you could make this class and discover this. It's great. I mean, it's nice to know that we always have discoveries to make and you never know when. So at any rate, so we've got this first year, right, from Nisan to Rosh Hashanah, and then the next year starts with Rosh Hashanah, Velashvi'it, Shminit, and for the 7th and 8th years, Sheyizra'u Bashminit, and now we sort of jump, right, to, because nothing's happening in that 7th year, but in the 8th year, B'mar Cheshvan, look at this, he says, you're actually, so here he may be saying that the barley is planted in Cheshvan, which would be a winter crop, because Cheshvan is the month, it's a fall month that follows Tishrei, right? So you would be planting in Mar Cheshvan of the 8th year, Vayikitzeru b'Nisan, and then it gets, so this has to be the barley again, right? That they reap it in Nisan. So imagine this is how we're getting through these 3 years here, right? So this part of the year from Nisan to Tishrei, right? We have the harvesting of that year's crops, and then from Tishrei to Elul, there's no planting and no harvesting, right? And then so it takes you into the 8th year here, which is after the month of Cheshvan. So here we are, and the barley. But that means that in the 8th year, you'd still be having barley, right? After Nisan, that Nisan's part of that 8th year. And then I guess because Sukkot is after Rosh Hashanah, that would be the fruit trees. You'd be working on your fruit trees in the 8th year, and you'd be harvesting the fruit in the 9th year. This is the best I can do. I hope it's at least relatively clear. I try to create a table. Interestingly enough, I'm not the only person who's confused by this. The Torah Tamima actually says that that this isn't so clear. And he just mentions that, and he mentions a Rabbi Yonatan here, Ben Yosef Omer, V'asaha tvua l'shalosh shanim, right, for 3 years. And he says, Al tikra l'shalosh, don't say 3, ela l'shalish, but to a 3rd, right? So, and then he explains, and then there's this general comment that says, Mikan l'tfuah, from here we derive that for produce, the azlinan batar shilish gidula, that we follow a 3rd of its growth, that when it's a 3rd growth, it's a year, I suppose, of its growth. It's considered a significant point in its growth. Again, that just raises more questions for me. And then there's, of course, the comment here, right here. And he says here, Yesh lomar de kashele, that for Rabbi Yonatan, there's a difficulty. Bichlal hamispar shalosh shanim. Look at this. In the generality of saying the number 3 years, kan, here. Ha-ein kan rak shtei shanim. Because if you really consider it, we're really talking about 2 years of growth of the plants. Shvi'it ushminit, the 7th year and the 8th year. and Mechag HaSukkot Shel Shvi'it, from the festival of Sukkot of the 7th year, Shehu Eit HaAsif, which is considered the time of the ingathering, the Tfu'at HaShana, for all the produce of the year, Shishit, etc., etc. I'm not going to keep reading here, but he just goes on. He talks about, he says, Rashi, Rambam Tarchu de Shevze, that Rashi and Nachmanides worked very hard to try and make sense of this. So basically, he says, if we understand it as thirds, then it makes more sense. But just as I said, this is stuff that I was trying to work with myself. Here we go. Ad Shana HaTshi'it, until the 9th year. Ad Chag HaSukkot Shel Tshi'it, until the festival of Sukkot in the 9th year. Shehi Eit Ba HaTfu'ah Shel Shminit, because that would be when the 8th year, when the produce of the 8th year matures, L'toch habayit, and that you can bring it into your home. At that point, you can the stuff that's grown in that 8th year, of course, you can bring into your home. Shekol yemot hakayetz, because all the days of summer, hayu basadeh, they were in the field, begranot, in the granaries. They weren't actually in a place where they could be personally consumed. Uve Tishrei, and Tishrei, who ate ha'asif, Tishrei is the time of the ingathering labayit, into the home. Upa'amim, and there were times, shahaitat sricha la'asot, there would be times when it was necessary to have this blessing, la'arba shanim, for 4 years. Why? Because every 50th year, there was a Jubilee year. So you had the 49th year, which would have been a Shemitah year, and the 50th year, which would be a Jubilee year, and we will be reading about that. And you see that now you have 2 consecutive years, essentially, of sabbatical years, okay? Vashishit shelifnei hashmitah, so we're talking about the 6th year before the Shemitah, Hashvi'it, which is the 7th year, shehein b'telim me'avodat karka, where you cannot perform field labor, work in the land. Shtei shanim ritzufot, that is 2 consecutive years. Hashvi'it, the 7th year, v'hayovel, and the Jubilee year. Umikraze, however, remember this scripture is only talking about 3 years. And he's saying, but wait a second, there are times when you need this for 4 years. He says this particular scriptural verse is referring to the regular Shemitah cycle, and not the one that includes the Jubilee year. And that's why that's said here, not to exclude the Jubilee year, but for us to understand that there's a principle involved. And I looked at a commentary on Rashi called Siftei Chachamim, and he says, he makes an interesting comment. He says, the reason why the Torah phrases it this way, remember it started off by saying, you're going to worry about the 8th year, and that the fact is that because the Jubilee only occurs every 50 years, that's not what's going to be on your mind, obviously, except every 50 years when you get to the year of the Jubilee. And so this is telling you basically what the reason why the Torah is putting it this way is because the 7 years comes a lot more frequently than 50 years, and that's what you're going to actually worry about. So going on a little bit, let's see if we can finish this up here. So now we're talking about the sale of land, right? People are purchasing fields and things. He says the land shall not be sold in perpetuity. You cannot sell the land in perpetuity. Ki li haaretz. And here it says it very explicitly. For the land is mine, God saying. Ki gerim, look at this. For you are gerim, sojourners, vetoshavim, right? You're only there temporarily. Atem imadi, you are with me. So God is this ultimate place, right? And we are simply renters and temporary dwellers in this. So there's this willingness to look at mortality face to face, right, up front, and say, what are its implications for us on a daily basis as to how we view this world? And, there's that wonderful statement in the Dhammapada, which says, you too shall pass. And if you focus on that, you will not stray. You will not do stupid things. So here it is right here. Let's take a look at the Rashi. Let's meet Tut, I believe is where he starts. Yeah, okay, here we go. V'ha'aretz lo timakir. You shall not outright sell land. Litain lav al chazarat hasadot. This is putting a negative commandment on the commandment to make sure that the fields are returned leva'alim to the original owners by Yovel in the Jubilee year. Shelo yehe halokech kovsha. Because the one who purchases, that is, that the one who purchases the land shouldn't, quote, conquer it, meaning now take possession of it is what it's meaning. Letzmitut means lepsika. He explains because smitut is a rare word. He says lepsika. In other words, in finality. Lemechira psuka, outright sale is what this means. And we sometimes talk about halacha psuka, right? Jewish law determined. But it's interesting because in a way it means coming to an end, and it's as if our relationship of God, this legal relationship that we have with our Creator, is an ongoing process, that it's always developing. But when we make a psak halacha, we determine the halacha in a specific kind of way. So, olamit, in perpetuity. Ki li haaretz, for to me is the land, and this is in Sifra. Al teira einecha ba, do not feel bad about it. She'eina shalcha, because it isn't yours to begin with. Or don't feel bad about the fact that it's not yours, that it doesn't belong to you. Uvechol eretz achuzatam, in all the land of your possession, of your inheritance, geula titnu la'aretz, you shall give redemption to the land. The land shall be redeemed. So it's interesting what this is going to say. Uvechol eretz achuzatam, throughout the land of your possession. And this is lerabot, to include batim, houses, ve'eved ivri, and a Hebrew slave, ve'davar zeh mefurash, and this matter is explained bekiddushin, in the tractate Kiddushin, beperek Aleph, in chapter 1 of the Talmud Kiddushin, and he gives you the page number 21. Ulefi pshuto, and according to the simple understanding, the basic understanding, samuch lepasha shela acharav, that this is attached to the Parsha, the paragraph, or the section that follows it, shehamocher achuzato, that one who sells his personal land, right, Rasha, his inheritance, Rashai le'geula, is permitted, he has permission, le'ga'ala, to in fact redeem it, to redeem that land, la'achar shtei shanim, after 2 years. In other words, if he makes a sale to someone of the land, which presumably then is until the next Yovel, even if it's more than 2 years, even let's say it's 30 years, he still can come to redeem his land after a minimum of 2 years. He has to allow the person who bought the land at least 2 years of use on the land. Or krova, whether it's himself personally or his relative, who's his ve'ein halokeach yachol la'akayev, and the one who purchased the land has no permission to prevent him from doing this. It's a law in the Torah. So essentially, the person who purchases that land has a minimum of 2 harvests and possibly a 3rd harvest, depending on when the land was sold. It's possible that he might even have as many as 3 harvests from that land. But that is specifically what you are buying, are harvests. And we'll mark this in here.
By letting the land rest,
Yes.
Humans, when they think they own land, sometimes they destroy so many things by wanting to produce things like food. They'll destroy some natural things that the land really needs. So
Yes.
when the land is allowed to rest, then so much of the natural habitat comes back. And by doing that and letting it reseed itself and letting it grow, and it becomes the natural fertilizer and the
Hmm. Hmm.
natural life of
Right.
the land. So love this. Thank you.
I'm so great. Okay, let's see if we can do, I'm going to stop the recording and let's see if we can do a Kaddish D'Rabbanan.